All right, we are good. So welcome everybody to the New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for this week. Last week we had a great week as we had a trivia night, which was a big hit with everybody. Looking forward to the upcoming weeks. Noel Hine will be speaking next week about Johnny Antonelli. And then the following week, we have Jeff Stewart, who'll be talking about teams that left their cities, Twilight teams, they're called. And he'll be talking about the Giants leaving New York in the last season being 1957. Everything is pretty much booked up until July now, and we are on our roll. So thank you all for supporting us and for coming out tonight. Tonight, we have Lincoln Mitchell, who is a professor, just a really smart guy, and an author who's written 3 books about the Giants. He's going to be talking about, and Lincoln spoke at Affinities twice to our group when we had some, live meetings. He's going to be talking about this book, Baseball Goes West. And he also, a brand new book just came out at the end of last month, The Giants in Their City.
Wow. And
both of these books tie into the Giants moving or potentially moving. And before Lincoln speaks, I'm going to have him introduced by great Bob Lurie. And for those of you who don't know Bob was the owner of the Giants during the 70s when Horace Stoneham sold the team until Peter McGowan's group bought the team in the early 90s. When I was growing up and I became a truly Giant fan who was actually aware of everything, Bob was the owner of the team and put out some great product. I know he was always trying to upgrade the stadium and move the stadium, and he saved them from going to Toronto. And eventually, when there was no stadium to be built, was going to sell them to Tampa. That was when the National League did not let that happen. So then Bob sold the team to Peter McGowan's group. But Bob, first of all, thank you for everything you did for the Giants. You did a great thing keeping them in San Francisco. You might have hurt some of us because if they moved east, we would get some sleep here. But we thank you for doing the right thing by keeping the team in San Francisco. And Bob, you're always welcome here. If you ever want to speak to the group, please know that. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Bob. You have a few words to say, and then you'll introduce Lincoln.
It's a pleasure for me to be associated. I've heard about the Preservation Society in New York, and I know that we keep the name of the New York Giants alive, or you're trying to. And of course, one of my great thrills, obviously, is the fact that the Giants did come to San Francisco. And I had the opportunity in 1976 to purchase a team under a very stressful afternoon where I had a meeting with the National League owners because most of them wanted to go to Toronto because they could not stand Candlestick Park. With that, I asked for 48 hours to look at the problem, and because there were other people in San Francisco interested in getting involved. In their great judgment, they gave me 5 hours. And said, come back in 5 hours, let me know what you're gonna do. Walter O'Malley was a great help because he hated to see that rivalry disappear. In 5 hours, I came back and reported that all of my people that might be interested call out for a 4-hour lunch. But, I won't go into all the details of how we saved the team, but we did. Yeah. Got permission from all the owners to go ahead. So anyhow, I had the pleasure of meeting Lincoln probably 2 years ago. Had a great relationship. I'm a great admirer of Lincoln. I've read his books and been with him, and we had lots of conversations and interviews and meetings as he did. And as you read the book, you will see how many people he has talked to and has written. The book is out, as other people this evening have said outstanding things about the book, and I certainly couldn't agree more. It's so well written. It's a great read. I hope all out immediately and get the book. And so, Lincoln, thank you for doing such a superb job and just being so direct and so perfect in everything that you did. It's a pleasure to introduce you and looking forward to your words.
Well,
thank you. Nice hand to Bob Lurie and to Lincoln.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for that extremely kind introduction. I feel like the wise thing to do now would just be to end my talk and take questions, but because I don't know if I can top that. But I'm going to make a few comments. First, I want to thank Bob Lurie for joining us and for making such a wonderful introduction. I want to thank Gary for reaching out, all of the New York Giants Preservation Society. It's really great to be back speaking to the New York Giants Preservation Society. This is my third time speaking to you, and I enjoy it. It's great to hear kind of your institutional wisdom and memory about the Giants and talk baseball. And I also want to recognize one other person who's here on the Zoom, because this book it's a book about the Giants. It's a book about San Francisco, but it's also about my journey as a Giants fan. And there's one person on the call who was with me every step of the way, and that's Charles Fracchia, who's just on the Zoom as Charles. And Charles might be the biggest Giants fan I know. And I know in this crowd, that says a lot, but so I just want to say hi to Charles. I'm here to discuss two books, and they're kind of interesting books. One is about one move that happened for two teams, and the other is about two moves that didn't happen for one team, but came frighteningly close to happening. And that's really the storyline about this. The first time I spoke to the New York Giants Preservation Society, as I was signing the books that people were very nicely buying, I should say, everyone would tell me their story of how they became a Giants fan. And I felt like I was a little bit like a priest in a confessional, which is an odd feeling for a Jew. But, and I would basically respond by saying, I'm a Giants fan because I grew up in San Francisco. That's how I came to this. I was the first game I really watched closely was the set of games was the 1975 World Series, which of course didn't involve the Giants, but that was a World Series that could make a lifetime baseball fan out of you. And just as I was really beginning on this journey of becoming a baseball fan, the Giants were leaving town. And that's what it looked like. And that's where this story begins. I also want to say that a pandemic where many of us have to stay at home, and things are changing now a little bit, is a great time to write a book. You have a lot of time in front of your computer. You have a lot of time of online archives and that kind of thing. It's not a great time to promote a book. So I would urge you to buy the book, tell your friends about it, rate and review it, spread the word. I'm always open for media opportunities. I put a link in the chat, which you can click on, which will send you to the Kent State University website with all the information about how to buy the book and all of that. And also links to the other book, because they're both published by Kent State. So you can see both of them by either, etc. So baseball goes west, which is this story. You all know the basic story. Dodgers and Giants moved to California following the 1957 season. What I did with this story, with this book, was I took a different approach. Instead of the kind of what's become the standard in the culture of bemoaning this, the end of our innocence, the end of New York City, the end of America, whatever you want to call it, I look at this move as something that made Major League Baseball as we know and love it possible. It made Major League Baseball a national industry, a national game. Major League Baseball was played in a pretty small geographical area before then, even when you include the moves to Milwaukee and Kansas City earlier that decade. This move also, it brought more fans in, and it really moved the center of gravity to California for the 1960s. And I wanted the first decade, which I spent a lot of time on here, the first decade or so the Giants were in San Francisco was an extraordinary time. We all know this story, but I want to go over it just briefly. Some really excellent teams, right? This was a team where it was not unusual to have, 4 future Hall of Famers, at times 5 future Hall of Famers on the team. Mays, McCovey, Cepeda. A lot of them played first base, unfortunately. Perry, Marichal. These were some really good teams. We know it was the Dodgers and Giants rivalry The first, you probably all know the story, but the first game between the two teams on the West Coast was at Seal Stadium in San Francisco. The Giants won 8-0, and the headline in the San Francisco Chronicle the next day was, "We murder the bums." Right? The rivalry made the trip across the country and actually got stronger, more intense. The Johnny Roseboro game, in some senses, more nasty, but it helped make baseball interesting and important and a national institution. The Giants during this time did not win the World Series. We all know what happened. I don't want to go into it, the 1962 World Series yet again, but they came about as close as you can get to winning the World Series without winning the World Series. Charles M. Schultz, the creator of Peanuts, immortalized it in not one, but two cartoons, two comic strips. Just pull his hair out at the loss. But the Giants did something else in this period, which is often overlooked, which is that today we take for granted the great Latin American players who are in the game. We have to look very far to look at that. But the Giants were on the cutting edge of doing that. And it created some stress. It created some tumult because they encountered a fair amount of racism. But the Alou brothers, Felipe Alou being the most prominent, but also Mate and Jesus. And for my money, Felipe Alou should be in the Hall of Fame because of what he did for baseball. Juan Marichal, Orlando Cepeda, even the Latino ball players who were famous on the Dodgers, like Manny Mota, started out on the Giants. And I discussed that in some depth in Baseball Goes West, but that's an important part of it. And I was just really touched by this when I went out I was in San Francisco for the World Baseball Classic final a few years ago, and Puerto Rico was playing the Dominican Republic, and you could really see the role that the Giants played because there was the Cepeda statue and the Marichal statue. And people, depending who they're rooting for, where they were from, would gather at each statue. But there were still problems during this period. The attendance for a team that good was never good. The Dodgers were more successful by every measure. And I know that this crowd, I can be honest, and you can share my disappointment at that reality. But they won the World Series in 59. They won the World Series in 63, again in 65. They were setting attendance records in Dodger Stadium. By the mid-1960s, both teams had new stadiums, and it was pretty clear which ballpark was better, and it wasn't Candlestick Park. And then another thing in San Francisco was the legacy of the Seals. The San Francisco Seals were the Yankees of the PCL. They were the best team with the most famous players that won a lot. And in San Francisco, it was a real part of the culture. I mean, when Charles and I started going to games in the 70s, we were constantly told by older fans, we had big league baseball here before the Giants. It was part of the institutional memory of San Francisco that was important to pass down. And that made it harder for the Giants to break through than it did, even for the Dodgers, because the PCL teams out there just weren't as good or as beloved. And that's where we get to this book, The Giants and Their City. And this book, I try to do two things. I try to really tell two parallel stories in this book. The story of the Giants on the field, which some great teams, some not so great teams, some great players, some not so great players, and the story of the Giants off the field. I begin not by looking at the San Francisco Chronicle, which is the major paper out there, but at looking at the Toronto Star, which is the major paper in Toronto. Because in early January of 1976, the team was moving to Toronto. Wasn't rumored to be moving, wasn't exploring. It was going to Toronto. The Giants were going to Toronto. But let's backtrack a little bit. How did that happen? Well, by the mid-1970s, 74, 75, the Giants were consistently last place in attendance. Within a period of 18 months in the early 70s, they traded, released, or sold 4 future Hall of Famers. And they got for whom they got, Pete Falcone and son Sam McDowell and some money, and Charlie Williams, right? This is the last years of the Stoneham ownership. The farm system was drying up, and Stoneham was running out of money and kind of running out of patience. He was not a San Francisco guy. And you can't talk about the Giants in this era without talking about this. And anyone who's been to Candlestick Park in the old days remembers this. This is a replica sign of, I'm trying to get this in front of the camera the right way without blocking my face entirely, of what you saw when you drove to the ballpark or took the bus to the ballpark, as we did. And if you look down on it, you can see there's the baseball player and the football player, right? The multi-purpose stadium known as Candlestick Park. And Candlestick Park was the enduring challenge for the Giants for all these years. it was the reason why they were last in the league in attendance, even when they had some pretty decent teams in the mid-'70s. And the ballpark was just terrible. It was at a night game. You've all heard descriptions of the weather, but I will just summarize the weather this way. I grew up in San Francisco. My family's from New York. I would visit my grandparents and my family in New York in December for winter break when I was in school, when I was a child. And I would dress the same way for that trip, for walking around Manhattan with my grandfather as I would for a night game at Candlestick Park in the 70s and 80s. And that's kind of all you need to know about the weather there. And I talk a lot in the book. I interviewed a lot of these players, and it's not just the weather. I mean, Will Clark told me stories of, catching a ball on a bounce. Of course, was a first baseman and he's got a short right field, picking it up late in the season, and it's got green paint on it because the 49ers have been playing there, torn up the turf, and they just sprayed it green to kind of make it look good, right? It was almost not connected to the rest of the city. So it was not convenient to get to. There was a Ballpark Express, a bus you could take, but so there's great detail on that. But just to give you a sense of what happened, what that ballpark was like coming in. Now Bob very, I think, conveniently and eloquently summarized what it was like in his shoes to have to scramble and get this money and find a partner and buy the team. And I'm not going to repeat what he said because he said it better because he was there. I have a lot of description from him in the book, but I just want to give some context to this. In January of 1976, January 8th or so, the Toronto papers are not reporting we might get baseball. They're saying we might finish third in the NL East. The Pirates and Phillies are looking good, but the Giants can finish third. We're not sure if Wes Westrum will be fired or not. He was the manager at that time of the San Francisco Giants. Here's how much tickets will cost in the bleachers. We have Major League Baseball. That was what the story was. The other thing that happened in the first 10 days of January of 1976 is that San Francisco got a new mayor. 1975, November, there was a very, very contentious and competitive election for mayor of San Francisco. The candidate who came in third is probably the name you know best. That's Dianne Feinstein. But it ended up in a runoff between a guy named John Barbagelata, who I would describe as kind of a Frank Rizzo, Rudy Giuliani type Republican. Rizzo was a Democrat, but you get the point. And a guy named George Moscone, who was a progressive Democrat. Very, very close race that was. And Moscone narrowly won. And Moscone has this progressive agenda for San Francisco. He's going to diversify the boards and commissions, return power to the neighborhoods, all of those things that he wanted to do. But George Moscone was also a all-city basketball player. I've learned since I wrote this book that he was a second baseman on his high school baseball team, and a good one. He went to St. Ignatius, which is a good sports program in San Francisco. And you win a narrow election, especially when you're the lefty Democrat, you can't have the baseball team leave your first month in office, your first year in office. That could be the difference between getting reelected or not. So he had to find a way to keep the team in San Francisco. And that's where Bob Lurie came in, because Lurie was the first person to say he needed $8 million. The team was going to go for $8 million. And what Moscone needed to do was to get $8 million from people who would keep the team, commit to keep the team in the city, and buy some time. Now, the story Bob Lurie talked about having 5 hours, the only reason he even got that far was because Moscone got the case, the stay in front of a friendly judge. Not a friendly judge ideologically. It was an appointee of Governor Reagan, who was not a left-wing Democrat at all, but a judge who was a San Franciscan and who didn't want the team to go. So he was able to buy a little bit of time. Bob Lurie came in with $4 million off the bat, which was half the team. And then nobody in San Francisco was stepping up with the other $4 million. I want you to think about that, what that'd be like today, right? I mean, people, I could raise $4 million in San Francisco if I had to. You know what I mean? Sorry? And
you shouldn't be sitting there.
So his initially Bob Short, who had been the kind of not quite beloved owner of the Texas Rangers, agrees to come up with the other half. But then the National League says, we don't want Bob Short. If we sell to this ownership group, Bob Lurie has to be the point person. We like him, we trust him. And Bob Short says, I don't want to do that. And then we get that 5 hours that Bob Lurie talked about. And at the very end of that period, Bud Herseth, who's kind of a forgotten figure, comes in with another $4 million. They become partners. And after a year, Herseth, who had no particular interest in San Francisco or the Giants, sells the team to Bob, and he becomes the sole owner. So that's how we get to the Giants at least staying the first time. But throughout this period, it is a constant struggle to keep the team in San Francisco. Any offseason, the newspapers and the sporting news, whatever it is has two storylines about the San Francisco Giants. What are they going to do to get better? Will they trade for so-and-so? What free agent, as free agency comes around, will they sign on the one hand? And what are they going to do? Are they going to find a way to stay in San Francisco? So, 1 year it's a ballpark. It's exploring doming the ballpark. Other years it's constant. Maybe they're going to move to Denver. Maybe they're going to move here. And the struggle to find a long-term home for the Giants just takes over. They end up four times they go in front of voters, twice in San Francisco, once in 1987, once in 1989, twice down the peninsula in Santa Clara County. 4 times they lose. And after a point, you just kind of give up, right? What are we going to do? And the 1989 initiative, to pick up on a question somebody was asking as we were starting, I think it was William Schiffner, as we were starting, really is a proposal to build a ballpark more or less exactly where the current ballpark is. That was the spot, and that was recognized. But the voters rejected it. And I'm going to get to why when we talk about that fascinating 1989 season. But there's also these other things going on that a new owner and this period in baseball, there's free agency. The 1974-75 offseason would have been recognizable to a baseball executive from 30 years earlier. The 1976-77 season would have been something totally new. And this happens very quickly. So how does a team that's not the Yankees, not in a huge market, how do they adapt to that? What challenges does it raise? And then we have the 1981 strike, and we have the collusion. So there's all these things happening to the Giants, as with all teams, but this is a deep dive into the Giants during this period.
Okay.
So that's kind of the off the field stuff. But what's happening on the field, right? Because this is a book about baseball. Well, I'm not going to go over every year because that would take too long, but I do cover more or less every year in this book. And I just want to highlight a couple of things. 1976, 1977 is the first year of free agency. And as you probably recall, that's the year where there's so many stars. There's half the old championship A's teams, Raleigh Fingers, Reggie Jackson was from the Orioles, but Reggie Jackson, Don Baylor, Sal Bando, Bert Campaneris, Bobby Grich, all of these great players. And the Giants don't get any of those guys. But for that 1 year of 1977, for the bang for the buck, the best free agent signing, bar none, was Willie McCovey. And the 76-77 seasons when the Giants brought Willie McCovey back. And I cannot overstate how important that was for the franchise. And that was something that Bob Lurie did in the first year of free agency. And the reason was this. Now, when I talked to Bob, I mean, you were on the call, but he said it was a baseball move. And I think that was true, but it was more than a baseball move. It was a way to reconnect with the glory days of the 60s while not reconnecting with New York. Mm-hmm. And McCovey was always particularly beloved in San Francisco. A lot of people who aren't from there don't realize this. But as late as 1990, McCovey was more beloved than Willie Mays.
We know that.
Yes, right. Thank you. And the reason was he was never a New York guy. He was one of our San Francisco guys. But he was gone for a few years. And he came back, had a great year in 77, won the Comeback Player of the Year award, but probably more importantly, or equally importantly, made it possible for younger fans to connect to the Giants' history in a way. And when you talk to fans, Willie McCovey is almost universally their favorite ball player. So that was the first big on the field event. And then there's a couple of good years in the early period here. 1978, I wrote a whole book on the 1978 year and season. That's this book, San Francisco Year Zero. So I won't go into it in too much detail, except to say that this was a year where they were in first place most of the summer. The big pickup they made in the offseason was Vita Blue, and who had just a fantastic year, came in third in the Cy Young balloting, and they traded 7 players, Dave Heverlow, John Henry Johnson, Mario Guerrero, Gary Thomas, and Phil Huffman, John Henry Johnson, real future Hall of Famers, for really probably the second best left-handed pitcher, third in the league at that time after Steve Carlton. That's the team of Jack Clark, Mike Ivey, and they're in first place all of the summer. This is the first, importantly, the first good Giants team that doesn't have Willie Mays on it. The first good Giants team with no connection to New York. And the first inkling in retrospect that the Giants can bond with their city in a new way. And they can really become San Francisco's team in a real way. And that's when that journey begins. I want to skip forward to the 1982 season because I want to do a little bit of just kind of the fun, some of the fun highlights here. But Gary, can I do the share screen here? Can you put me on as a host? So the 1982 season, by 1982, the Giants have a new manager. Joe Altobelli was managing the team in 78, but by 1982, they have Frank Robinson, who recently died a couple of years ago, but Frank Robinson was one of the great players ever to play the game. And, today's Jackie Robinson Day, and part of the story of Jackie Robinson includes Frank Robinson, who was the first African-American manager in the American League, or for any team, with the Cleveland Indians. And then a few years later, the first African-American manager in the National League with the San Francisco Giants. And he assembled Robinson liked veterans, and he assembled a veteran team that included Reggie Smith. Darrell Evans was still with the team and was getting older. Jack Clark, who had been around for a while, was young but was a veteran. Joe Morgan, of course, playing second base. And the team, amazingly, coming off a good post-strike second half in 1981, is in a tight three-way pennant race, division race for most of the fall, the late summer, early fall. And it comes down to, of course, an end of the last series of the year, which was in San Francisco. I'm just going to try to pull this up to show you, which was in San Francisco, in Candlestick Park. And the Giants basically needed to sweep. And they were knocked out on that Friday night. And I think Charles and I attended all three of these games. And they were knocked out on Friday night and then blown out on Saturday. So this is not good. And the Braves beat Atlanta. The Braves beat Atlanta. The Braves beat the Padres in San Diego. The score of that game is known. So all the Dodgers have to do is beat the Giants and they get a one-game playoff. And it looks like it's going to happen. And then this happens. And I will say that this was the national broadcast. When you look at it in the San Francisco networks, they show some great footage of Tommy Lasorda he's gone as well, but there's nothing like seeing Tommy Lasorda disappointed at a Dodgers loss. So I'm just going to show this footage here to give you a sense of that 1982 season. There's Frank Robinson. So that's the image you should freeze on. So this was the right clip. I'm glad I was able to do that. And I show that clip because I never get tired of seeing it. Joe Morgan was a great player with the Giants and a great pickup for the Giants, who they then in a series of trades ended up getting Mike Krukow, who was a very valuable pitcher and also just kind of a Giants legend because he's such a wonderful announcer. But there's a poignancy there, in my view. And the poignancy is that from the time the Giants got lost to the Pirates in 71 in the NLCS until a few years after this clip, that and Mike Ivey's Grand Slam and the Memorial Day weekend in 1978 are the two biggest highlights. This is a team that is really struggling to make it back to the playoffs. It's been over a decade since they've been in the postseason by the time Joe Morgan hits that home run. And when I talked to Larry Baer, who is an executive with the Giants now and a long-time, multi-generational San Franciscan lifelong Giants fan, he really said, and I think he spoke for all Giants fans, we knocked the Dodgers out of the pennant. We didn't knock ourselves in, but we knocked the Dodgers out, and that was almost as good. And that was true, but it's not the same as getting to the playoffs. And if 1982 things to come in the future, they didn't come right away. So the following 3 years are the worst 3 years in modern Giants history, going back to the pre-John McGraw era to find 3 years in a row where they were that bad. And I'm not going to bemoan just how bad these teams were, but they were terrible. I mean, there was, guys with Dan Dreesen, Gene Richards, Brad Wellman, got prospects who weren't prospects, older players who you didn't quite know what they were doing on the team, and perpetually Jack Clark and Darrell Evans, who were great players. But this also was an important period because it helped brand the Giants in interesting ways. And it was clear that for the team to succeed in San Francisco, it was a little different. This isn't the Texas Rangers. This isn't the St. Louis Cardinals. This is a different city, different team, different attitude. And the Giants at this time do a lot of different things to try to get fans there. So I took this off my bulletin board to show you. This is a quad candlestick. Everyone seen these before? Most of you, I assume, have a few of these. And the idea of the quad candlestick was you stay to the end of an extra inning game and you get one, because it was an extra inning night game, because it was so cold. And frankly, if you look, the ice caps on the SF, they got, you had to earn these things. And it was great. And I probably had 4 or 5. I'm not sure where the other 3 or 4 are. But it was a way to make light, and if not turn a weakness into a strength regarding the ballpark, to at least not take it or the team so seriously, because the team's losing 90 games and you're taking every loss seriously. It's brutal for the fans. So and I talk a lot about that. And I want to show you, I'm going to go back to the share screen again, because this is another, I think, really great marketing breakthrough. So hold on one moment here. Get the share screen up. Can you re-enable the share screen, Gary?
I thought I did.
Somehow.
There it is.
Great. So I'm going to pull this up. Oh, wait, wrong. I'm going to pull this up. Hold on. Share that.
Yep, there you go.
All right. Okay, and we're going to look at this.
Crazy crab.
All right, there's only.
When we asked Giants fans what kind of mascot they'd like, 63% say mascots.
Okay. There's only so much of the Crazy Crab song you can take before we go a little nuts. So we'll wrap that up. But this really captured. The book is called The Giants and Their City, and the crab is part of that because, of course, as I say in the book, unless you keep kosher, that crab is one of the best parts of in a city that is, for my money, as good as any in the country, if not the world, for food. The crab is a great part of that cuisine. Whether you get the Vietnamese place out in the Richmond, whether you have a nice chipino on Christmas Eve, you get some fresh crabs at the wharf. It's a great, only in San Francisco, it's associated with the city. It's a ridiculous mascot, right? I mean, and you were supposed to boo the mascot. Some people threw things at the mascot, which you were not supposed to do because you don't want to hurt the mascot. But, and it brought a joyfulness at a time that there was not much joy on the field. And I'm just thinking about this. I had a friend in high school who was on the baseball team. He was my classmate and we were friends, and we played baseball together. He was also a big Giants fan. And like sometimes between classes, he would just kind of, if we passed each other in the hall, he would like for 5 seconds do like the Crazy Crab song and dance. And it was just kind of a really funny thing, but it helped the Giants craft a personality that fits what is not a typical city, what is, for my money, a great city. And then here's where we get to the good part of the story. 1985, 84, the team loses 100 games. 1985, the team is just terrible. And late in the 85 season, the Giants make a couple changes. Specifically, Bob Lurie makes a couple changes. He fires the general manager and fires the manager. And he brings in Al Rosen to run the team as the general manager. And who then brings in Roger Craig to run the team. And that Lurie, Rosen, Craig trio restored the Giants to within a few years back to the World Series. But more than that, I don't think anyone's ever really laughed at the Giants since then. Those days of the mid 70s and mid 80s, they were a laughing stock. Not since then. So a few years into this period, things really turn around. And if you look at that 85 and 84 team, one of the biggest problems was that they got no production out of first and second base. And one of the biggest problems was that in the early 80s, they weren't using their draft choices well. Well, opening day 1986, the Giants have a new right side of the infield that are both first-round draft picks from previous years for the Giants, who are both great players. And both end up finishing the top 5 in the Rookie of the Year balloting that year. And what to me is very interesting about that is that the guy who finished between them was Kevin Mitchell, right? Who was later joined them on the Giants. And I'm talking, of course, about Robbie Thompson and Will Clark. And the first batter of the 1986 season, Will Clark was in the leadoff spot. He was a rookie, eventually moved to the number 3 spot usually. And he hits the ball out of the ballpark in Houston against Nolan Ryan. And that set a real tone. The 86 team, I think, far exceeded expectations. Doesn't win the division, but far exceeded expectations. And the 87 team wins the division. And this is hard to imagine in today's baseball. They hadn't made it back to the playoffs in 16 years. They win the division. They go back to St. Louis against the Cardinals. You all know this story. I'm just going to put a little stories from the book in here. 3-2, and we all know what happened. So I'm just going to give one quick personal story here because I'm not going to recount the games because you all know about the games. But in 1987, I was a college student, and I was in the Giants from the playoffs, and I was traveling in China. I was living a semester abroad in China. And this is there's no internet. There's nothing. How are you going to find out? So I time it so I figure game 7, I can figure out about an hour after the game should be over. I know it'll be over. Who, and there's no cell phones, right? So I call my friend Charles, and you San Franciscans will appreciate this. I call my friend Charles at his mom's place because I guess they were watching the game together there. And he picks up the phone and his mom picks up the phone. Lincoln, you're in China. Why are you calling? And Charles knows exactly why I'm calling. And he takes the phone from his mom and says, they lost. Not even hi, just they lost. I hadn't seen him in months. And I said, I'm not going to say what I said. I said a profanity. And then I hung up and said, I got to go. It's very expensive. And I was very upset. Charles then calls my mother. And the next day in Herb Cain's column is the story of me calling home from China to get the score. So that's my personal experience with that 87. If you don't know Herb Cain is, if he was, for 50 years, the first thing every San Franciscan did was read Herb Cain.
By the Bay.
And so that was a disappointment, but they got back. 88, they had a good year, didn't make it. There was some team in LA managed to win the World Series that year. And then if there's every now and then there are these years where just more that you can imagine happens on the ball field. 1989 is that year. If the only thing that happened that year was Kevin Mitchell's barehanded catch in the outfield, we'd remember that. If the only thing, I feel like I'm at a Passover Seder, if the only thing that had happened that year was Dave Drevecki's extraordinary comeback followed by his injury, we would remember that. But some other things happened that year as well. The Giants won the division. By now they have Kevin Mitchell, who they've added to the team, Rick Russell. These guys came over mid-87. Drevecki's hurt, which is unfortunate. But they have a very good team. Matt Williams has been brought up to play third base. They have a real top-notch infield, probably one of the very best in baseball. Brett Butler is still a top leadoff hitter. And they make it back to the playoffs. And in game 1, future Hall of Famer on the short list of probably the greatest post-war pitchers, Greg Maddux, gets his hat handed to him by Will Clark, who was absolutely on fire. And drives in 6 runs in the first game. They come back to San Francisco. They're up 3-1. And I realize this is now very Semitic talk, but I'm just going to go with this. Game 5 is on Yom Kippur. I have now graduated from college, and I tell my boss I don't work on Jewish holidays because I don't. And he says, okay. And a couple days before Yom Kippur, he calls me up and he says, listen, I know you're not, or someone from his office calls me up and says, I know you're not working, but we have these 2 tickets. I said, oh yeah, I go to baseball games on Jewish holidays. So I managed to get tickets for Charles and I and another friend for this game. And we had there, I think I looked at the crowd, there were 62,000 people at that game. About 49,000 of them had better seats than we did, but we were there. And they are deadlocked 1-1. Rick Russell is just pitching, who is a wonderful pitcher who had looked like a major leaguer the way I look like an NBA basketball player, right? I mean, he was overweight, he was very casual looking, but a great athlete, great pitcher, just kept throwing strikes, great control, lots of ground balls. And again, there are pitchers in the Hall of Fame who are not as good as Rick Russell was. And 2 outs in the bottom of the 8th, and we're kind of resigned to, oh no, We have to go back to Chicago. Is this going to be 1989 all over again? Are they going to lose this? You know, we're really kind of stressing about this. 2 outs. Candy Maldonado, who had kind of lost his starting job in right field because he couldn't hit anymore, comes up to pinch hit for Russell. And we're thinking, oh, goodness, they're taking Russell out. But we have a better bullpen because we picked up Bedrosian. We can still win this thing somehow. What's going to happen? He gets a walk. Oh, that's better than getting it out, because what we really care about is not getting a run across, but we want to make sure that Clark and Mitchell bat in the bottom of the 9th. That's what our thinking was at the ballpark. Well, Brett Butler comes up and he gets a walk, and now we're thinking this is interesting. And then Robbie Thompson gets a walk. And I'm going to go back to the share screen because if I can get this to work here, because now we have set the scene for what I think is the biggest, is the biggest hit in the second biggest hit in San Francisco Giants history, in Giants history. The first being Bobby Thompson's home runs, the biggest in San Francisco Giants history. And this is the one where I couldn't get the Hank Greenwald call, which is better than Vince Scully. Now, Vince Scully was one of the greatest announcers ever, but on this particular call, Hank Greenwald with his Superman has done it again, gets it right. But they have not been to the World Series in 27 years. The bases, there's a seal on every rock, as we say in San Francisco. And Mitch Williams, who was the best just real tough on left-handed hitters, comes in to pitch to get, because he has to get Will Clark, who was one of the very, very best hitters in baseball that year. And if I recall, I don't think he was very successful. Here's what happens. Here's Williams. Here's Will Clark. It's a 1-2 pitch.
In comes one. In comes Butler. Going to third is Thompson. 3-1, San Francisco.
And this is an extraordinary. Sorry, keep that cheering here. This is kind of an extraordinary moment because we knew at that point we were going to win the game. Bedrock came in. He gave up 1 run at the top of the 9th. It didn't matter. The game ends with a ground ball to Robbie Thompson. And when I talked to Robbie Thompson, it was a great discussion. And I asked him, what was it like to field the ground ball that you know was going to get this franchise that had waited 27 years to get back to the World Series? And he said, I'm thinking, Robbie Thompson was a very, very solid defensive second baseman, if you remember the guy. Very good ball player. And he said, I'm just thinking, I'm here for my defense. Robbie Thompson, I can hit it to me. I want this one. I want this one. Ball hits to him. And the next thing he says is, oh shit, it's coming to me. And Robbie Thompson said that I bobbled it and then I threw it to Clark. But if you look at the video, he didn't bobble it. I went back and I looked. He fielded it cleanly, threw it to Will Clark. The Giants are going back to the World Series. First time in 27 years. And that meant an enormous amount to the fan base. It was a very, very big deal. The problem was, well, the Giants were up against a very good team in that World Series, the Oakland A's of '89, which may have been a premature PED using team. I don't have any proof of that, but I've certainly heard those rumors. And they go to, now this is the Bay Bridge series. Remember, both teams are in the Bay Area. And we all know what happens. The Giants lose the first 2 games badly. When you go to Candlestick Park, unfortunately, it wasn't a Jewish holiday, so I couldn't get tickets. And game 3 rolls around. And as they're about to take the field, we get an earthquake. And I talked to a lot of people there, and it was fascinating to hear their memories, right? So Chris Beyer tells a story about Larry Gatelin, which is from the country band, the Gatelin Brothers, like running out of the ballpark in terror. A number of players, as you can imagine, are my kids okay at home? Where's my wife? Kevin Mitchell worried about his grandparents in the stands. Art Agnos, kind of the mayor coming in. And and then Dusty Baker, who was a coach at that time, not a manager, but a coach, remembered what he said. I was having a pregame snack, and he remembered what the snack was. He remembered he was eating banana nut bread in the clubhouse because he wanted a snack before the game. And Bob Lurie, being a longtime San Franciscan, who'd probably been through a few earthquakes at that time, tells, I think it's Al Michaels, oh, we're going to play, don't worry. Because you never expect the big one until you have the big one. The good news about this moment is that for all of the problems of Candlestick Park, nobody was hurt at the ballpark. There was almost no major structural damage. Nobody was hurt. And that was great. The rest of the city, there were problems. And I go into this in great depth, and there's a lot of good anecdotes in there about this. I will tell my favorite anecdote about this because it's just a fantastic story, but I'm only going to tell if you agree it's not going to prevent you from reading the book. So Fay Vincent was the commissioner at the time. And Fay Vincent was in a bit over his head and was an East Coast guy. And now both of the Bay Area teams are trying to figure out what to do. Both cities, Oakland and San Francisco. So he calls a meeting because the game was scheduled for San Francisco, games 3, 4, and 5. And he calls a meeting, which is attended by Bob Lurie, Al Rosen, and Corey Bush representing the Giants, Fay Vincent, and Art Agnos, the mayor of San Francisco. And Agnos at this time was working with the Giants on an initiative to build a new ballpark downtown. So the Giants and the mayor are working closely on this because they really want this thing to pass. Both of them, both sides do. And Fay Vincent, now Agnos, I like the guy. I always supported him. I never voted for him because I was living in San Francisco at the time, but I always supported him and wished he'd gotten reelected. And Agnos was a smart progressive Democrat, but he was known as being a little touchy, somebody who had a kind of edge to him, and somebody you didn't really want to mess with. He was kind of, I mean, to put this in perspective, Agnos was shot point blank range by the Zebra Killers in the early 1970s and survived, right? This is not a guy this is a tough guy. And so Fay Vincent says to Agnos, when are you going to restart the World Series? And Agnos says, well, we're going to start the series when we're ready to start the World Series. And Fay Vincent says, I'd hate to be the first mayor who couldn't finish the World Series in his city, which is if you think about it for a quarter of a second, pretty insensitive thing to say. There's a major thing that just happened there, an earthquake. So Agnos, being Agnos, responds by saying, and I'd hate to start the World Series while we're still looking for dead bodies. Well, that doesn't convince Fay Vincent. So he says, I think we should move the World Series to San Diego. Now, it's not the San Diego Giants. It's the San Francisco Giants. It's a whole different city. It's very far away. It's much farther than going from, I don't know, Boston to Washington or something. That seems lost on Fay Vincent. Now, if you were in the room at that time or a fly on the wall, what you would expect is Art Agnos to lose his cool, right? That's Art Agnos. He's insulting his city. He's trying to take something from his city. What you wouldn't necessarily expect was the more soft-spoken principal in the room to interject. And that's exactly what happened. So apparently, and I have this on good evidence from Bob himself, as well as from others who were in the room, including Art and Corey, Bob Lurie pounds his fist on the table. Bob said, I went a little ballistic. Those were your words. But pounds his fist on the table and says, over my goddamn dead body, are we moving this World Series to San Diego? After what we went through to bring these World Series back to this city and these fans were finishing it here. And that's what happened.
Accurate. You're accurate.
Thank you. And that is, I mean, we have to give Bob a lot of credit for keeping the team in 1976 from leaving. But, at the San Franciscan, even if you're not a baseball fan, I think we have to recognize that may have been his finest moment. He stood up for his city. Fay Vincent backed down, and they finished the World Series in San Francisco. Unfortunately, didn't go quite as we had hoped, right? The A's won the next 2 games, and then we go to the polls in 1989. I actually did vote in this election because I was living in San Francisco at the time. I voted for, yes, to build a new ballpark downtown where the current ballpark is. And between not winning the World Series, having the earthquake, some shenanigans from some out-of-town financial interests, the ballpark narrowly fails. And once again, the Giants are imperiled. I'm going to go over the last part quickly because we're kind of running out of time. But and it's really like a 1-2-3 punch. It's the earthquake, getting swept, and losing the initiative. And you felt like it was a real feeling, almost like a depression around the Giants. They were still a very good team in 90. They still had Clark and Mitchell. Russell got hurt. They still had Butler. But it felt like something I think Butler left free agency, collusion for related free agency. It was really, the team wasn't quite the same. And the next few years, there's this agonizing over, are they going to leave again? And then the new ownership comes in, a new mayor. I have another prop here. which is the new mayor, Frank Jordan, comes in, tries to put a group together to keep the Giants, and eventually we have this, and that's Frank Jordan in the middle. That's his son popping the champagne cork. Frank sent me this picture when the team is kept in San Francisco. But again, in 1992, it wasn't like they were rumored to be going. We were understood that they were gone, that this period had come to an end, and it didn't. And so this book, which again, in the chat is the link, but you can find it on Powell's or bookshop.com, whatever that site is, wherever you buy books online, is really a deep dive into a forgotten history, a forgotten period in the history of the Giants, but I think a very important one, not just because of the Giants on the field for this period, but because of the relationship between the city and the team that we now take for granted. But this is the period where that foundation was laid. So I think I've talked for probably too long. I'm happy to take any questions or comments or anything.
First of all, Lincoln, fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
It was great. And most of the people, not all of the people in here, have remained, Giant fans despite them being in San Francisco. So this time period is very special to them. I know Steve Rothschild was at that famous Game 6 with the Cubs and the Giants in the playoffs in '89. But just a great presentation, and look forward to getting the book.
Thank you.
Anybody questions? John McLaughlin, go ahead.
Yes, Lincoln, great job with the book. And this is also for Bob as well. If either one of you have insight into it, it'd be great. I had spoken to Jerry Reinsdorf before about his threat to move to Tampa. And he told me flat out, we were never moving to Tampa. That was just leverage to get a new ballpark in Chicago. And I'm wondering if the threat to move to first Toronto and then to Tampa was that, or how, were the moving trucks packing up like the Colts out of Baltimore, or was it an in-between type of stage?
Well, the first, Bob, you want to take that?
Okay, yeah. It was a matter of no other interest in San Francisco to building ball. We had lost 4 times for a new stadium, and I wasn't going to just go bankrupt with the way Candlestick Park was and what the attitude was. I made it clear to the people in Tampa when they came in the middle of the night without me knowing it and saying, here's an offer for the team. I said, the last thing I want to do is see the Giants leave San Francisco, and I will do everything in my power to try to keep it here. But I appreciate your offer. And then one thing led to another, and we were able to get a group that did buy the team.
Bill Clink.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, Lincoln, if I could defer to Bob on a, not so much a question, but a comment, really a thank you. Bob, any Giant fan would certainly like to go to All-Star games. My dad took me in 1961. I don't know how he got the ticket, but he did. In 1984, I didn't have a ticket. I flew from Phoenix up to the Bay Area. I went to the St. Francis Hotel, and you were in the Giants press room there. I had seen you a number of times in Phoenix at spring training, and I always said, hello, Mr. Lurie, welcome to Phoenix. I hope you enjoy spring training. You didn't know who I was, but when I showed up there that day, a punk kid came into the room first, and he said, hey, Bob, you got a ticket for tomorrow? I need one. And of course, you dismissed this young lad, as well you should have. I stood back and held my breath for about a minute. I walked up to you and said, Mr. Lurie, you don't know me. I'm Bill Clink. I'm from Phoenix. I've seen you at spring training. I flew up here. I need one ticket for tomorrow's game, and I'm willing to pay for it. You thought for a moment. You looked at me quizzically. You picked up the phone and called Mr. Schultz, the ticket manager, and said, do we have one for tomorrow? Okay. And thanks to you, I was sent down to the Giants ticket office, and you resold that ticket a second time. When I showed up to the game, I was sitting in the Bank of America box. And I got there early, and a bunch of bigwigs from the Bank of America, of course, came in. I was dressed not as I am today, but really with a suit and tie on, and had a nice 35mm camera and was taking pictures. But these guys said, "Who the hell are you? Where's the old guy from Fresno that should be here?" And indeed, he had given the ticket back. Bob, I'm glad you were able to resell that ticket twice. And I am forever indebted to you, because otherwise I'd have been standing outside of Candlestick Park, having spent all that money and not gone to the game. Thank you very much, Mr. Lurie.
I'm glad it worked out.
Probably don't remember that day, but
we normally don't sell tickets twice.
Well, I don't know what happened, but I paid Mr. Schultz $35 was face value on that ticket. I gladly paid him $35, and and was glad to sit in the B of A box. Thank you very much. Thanks, thanks, Lincoln, for allowing me to kind of interject a great thank you to a great man.
Gary?
That's a great story. I was at that game too, but not in the B of A box.
Gary, I have a question for Lincoln.
On the B of A box.
We got a couple of
line. Right line.
Bob, I got a quick question for you. I'm sorry. After you sold the team, a year later, Will Clark left the Giants to go to Texas. You saw him in his formidable years as the owner of the team. Had he stayed with the Giants, Hall of Famer?
And how Will Clark, when you know the term for a class act, he was at least that. He was a terrific guy, a perfect competitor, and yes, he deserved to, he would have been and should be in the Hall.
Thank you. Let's go to Jamie Rupert.
Clark, just quickly, Will Clark was a better player than Jim Rice. He's a better player than Andre Dawson. We've seen a lot of players going to the Hall of Fame who weren't as good as Will Clark. He was one and done on the ballot, which I find just bizarre.
Yeah, I just wish if he would have stayed with the Giants, I think he would have got so much more publicity.
Yeah, and staying with one team helps. Staying with one
Texas, and he's just forgotten. Nobody cares. Yeah. Jamie Rupert, you're up.
Well, hi, Lincoln. Thanks so much for the book. It's amazing. Hi, Bob. It's Jamie. How are you?
How are you, Jamie? Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. I just also really want to thank Bob. I think part of the story that doesn't get mentioned all the time is that Bob was close to Horace and close to the Giants, had been through so much with the team before he bought it. And again, I go back to, you're right, Bob, nobody in the city wanted the team. And for Bob to have stepped up and did what he did, I know we were all forever grateful. And I don't know we've ever said thank you enough, Bob, but thank you. It meant the world to the whole Giants family.
Well, appreciate the comment.
I don't know. Jim, Judge Jim, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick comment. You talked about 1978. Well, I was born and raised in Rochester, still live here. My first trip to San Francisco was in 1978, and I was at the Mike Ivey game. And I've been to hundreds of baseball games in 30 different stadiums, and I have never seen an atmosphere like in Candlestick after Ivey hit that home run. It was just the most electric stadium moment I've ever experienced, and I got to get your book just to read about that.
I was at that game as well, and I also describe it in the San Francisco Year Zero book. I agree with you. It was strange. I mean, it was a May game.
Yeah,
and the place went nuts. I mean, and at Candlestick Park, a packed crowd. I think the largest crowd ever to see a baseball game in the Bay Area up until that time.
I was at that game as well.
Yeah, Joel Tabelli from Rochester was the manager, so that's one of the reasons I went out that year. And when I got my tickets, like in February, I was expecting we'd have a crowd of about 3,000 at that game that weekend, and he ended up with like 58 or 60,000 people. Well, there. It was insane.
Well, a couple.
Joe was a super guy. I know he just passed away.
We just lost Joe. Yeah, we lost him.
And in '78, he could do no wrong. He was an extraordinary man. But one thought: the Giants, even when the attendance was terrible, right? They would often draw 20% of their year's attendance in just playing the Dodgers.
Yeah, weekend series against the Dodgers.
O'Malley talked about that rivalry, but that rivalry was really important to the Giants in the lean years. I'm talking before in the kind of late Stoneham years. So you were never going to get a small crowd for a Sunday against the Dodgers, especially if we knew what the weather was.
I got tickets right behind the dugout. I bought them early.
Sat in the upper. I was upstairs behind home plate, but in the upper deck.
It was just.
I believe. I don't know your name. Celia is.
Oh, it's George Schiffner.
George, I didn't recognize you.
Yeah, it's me. Yeah, Bill's brother.
I know.
Yeah, this is my wife's computer. Yeah, I wanted to ask Lincoln. If do you think that the A's ran, they ran off the Giants in '89, that they ran up the score, and that there was an extra hatred by the A's to show us up? Tony La Russa,
I mean, I think they were just trying to win that World Series. I mean, they were humiliated by a weaker Dodger team a year before. And I think they were just set on
and a red team a year later.
And the Reds team the year later, right? Everyone got to upset the A's except for us. But I think that was more of, and they were, and I think the intimidation was part of the game as well for them. Now one quick thing that I believe it was Will Clark who told this to me is that, or maybe it's Mike Krukow, I take that back. After the World Series, the Giants, the players I'm talking about now, went to the community and tried to help. The A's went to Arizona to practice. Now, I'm not making a judgment, but that's what happened.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I know this gentleman, Mars Breslow, has got his hand up on that.
Yeah, way to go. First of all, George, I apologize. I haven't seen you in a long time, so that's why.
Well, as a Giant fan since 1951, I'm out in the Bay Area in San Jose now, and it was a long time from 54 to 2010.
Good to see you, George. We're going to go to Mars and then Ed Logan. Mars, you're up.
Lincoln, I really appreciate you. You're very astute in what was going on in San Francisco. I'm one of the guys with transplants. I came out here in '67 where I saw Willie Mays and company play in the Polo Grounds. So I moved out here. Well, of course, I transferred college. That was the main reason. But I was going to go to a lot of games at Candlestick. And I became a partial season ticket holder with a 20-game plan at Candlestick. And then when they built the new ballpark, I bought a charter seat license. So I have a lot of things to address with you. One of them is, as far as there's a little controversy on this, how do you rate the Bay Area in the marketplace? Do you think they're a big market, medium market, or small market?
I think these are that taxonomy doesn't make any sense, and I think it is often used. It just doesn't make any sense because you'll hear things like the Braves are a big market team and the Angels aren't, right? So it really has to do. It is sometimes used as a surrogate measure for how much the owners are trying to compete.
My next question is, since Willie Mays was pretty much disrespected in his first year here, and he couldn't even rent a house or buy a house, do you think, San Francisco always preached about being a diverse city, and they embrace diversity, but behind closed doors, it really turned out to be true. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, I've actually been writing about this a lot for I'm working on a biography of George Moscone, so I've been doing a lot about in San Francisco political history. One real interesting footnote is that when Mays did finally buy a house, the real estate agent that he worked with was John Barbagelata, who ran against Moscone for mayor in '75 and was, but in the late 1950s, San Francisco was a conservative town. So and in the early 1960s, and it had Republican mayors. It was 95% white. They were still trying to integrate, there were no black cops, there were no black firemen. So this notion of San Francisco as a progressive place doesn't start until much later. And so to me, that does, this was San Francisco 1957 was a conservative city. So conservative things happened there. I mean, that's kind of how I see it.
All right, Ed Logan, you're up.
Yes, hello, Lincoln and Bob Lurie. We've never met, but I know you know my dad, Eddie Logan, was the clubhouse manager for the Giants.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was the bat boy in '57, and in '58, June of '58, I graduated high school in New York City, and the Giants were playing Philadelphia. My dad came up to the graduation at Carnegie Hall, and I flew back on the team plane to San Francisco in '58. In those days, I could sit right up there with the pilot, and we came in and over San Francisco. And so by the time I got there, somebody else had taken the bat boy, so I couldn't be the bat boy. So I had to work for Stevens in the Seal Stadium. And Fast forward to '89, I was there for the Cubs playoff game and couldn't stay for the World Series. But the day of the earthquake, my dad and my brother were in the upper deck and the whole thing shook. And, you know, for days he didn't call me. You couldn't get through the phone, you know, it was all messed up. I finally get through and I said, Dad, you didn't call me. He said, you could read about it in the paper. That's typically a typical dad. Yeah, we're worried sick, and he, there's no big deal. So I went on to ASU and the Air Force career, and I'm here in Arizona for that reason. But Bob, somehow we never met. I know you must have known my dad, and my dad hired Mike Murphy.
Great pleasure. What a guy.
And my dad was put in the Cactus League Hall of Fame with Horace Stoneham. So we're at least in one Hall of Fame for founding basically what is a 15-team Cactus League now here in Arizona. So that's my story.
Steve Rothschild.
Lincoln, if you look over Gary's left shoulder, there's a poster there, 50 Giants, 50 years. Through Gary, I was interviewed for the DVD that came out by Comcast. I'm not sure if you saw it. And it actually opened up with me. And I was in there 5 times. But the highlight for me was, like you, I was at the '89 playoffs living in New York. I went out with my son and actually started crying after the throw from second to first and the Giants finally win. And my son's looking at me, he's, what's wrong? What's wrong? And Scott, you don't understand. It's 27 years. And that's actually in that video. But I went to shul because we had a huge fight, my wife, and I knew this was going to happen because it was so good. I found the shul in the Jack Tar Hotel. You know where that is?
Yes, of course.
So we went for services after they clinched. And then we ran down to the wharf and got shirts. And the rest of it, of course, is history. But I'm I'm on a bus going back from the clincher back to the hotel. We stayed at the Roadway Inn on Larkin, just down the street from the Jack Tar. I'm on the bus. I had a seat. The guy standing in front of me has got a Cub uniform on. And he says to me, I just want to congratulate you for winning. And I said to him, you know, I really shouldn't have been here today or last night because it's the holiest day of the year for the Jewish people. He says to me, what are you talking about? My father's a rabbi in Sacramento.
All right, so I'm not the only one that behaves that way. You know that.
Baseball comes first.
Yeah. Lincoln and Bob, this question is for both of you. You know, I've been a Giant fan for over 50 years, all in San Francisco because I didn't get to see them in New York. I was too young. But I always thought the Yavecki, Lefferts, Kevin Mitchell trade, the Padres, probably one of the greatest Giant trades of all time in San Francisco. What do you gentlemen think?
Well, I would say when we got were able to get Al Rosen and what he was able to do, that certainly was one of the great trades. But he had a few others too. Robinson, the pitcher, was instrumental in helping us, and I just know that he worked hard to win every game. He was as sore a loser as I know, but when the game was over, he was fine, back to being the same charmer he always was. But no, that was certainly an important trade.
Yeah, I think the Giants have made some very good trades that are overlooked. Willie Montañez for Darrell Evans, right, which is one of the first trades of the era we're talking about here, was a fantastic trade. We don't recognize at the time how good a trade it was, but that was another great trade, which, you know, Darrell Evans was Darrell Evans. The Kevin Mitchell, Dravecky, Lefferts trade was instrumental in making this team from a good team to a team that could actually go to the playoffs. And Kevin Mitchell, who won that 89 MVP, who 89 was just magic that whole year, a fascinating player. And I spent a fair amount of time with him, even though we're not related, and really interesting talking to him about his experiences, and as well as his experiences with other baseball people from baseball history. I mean, he very close relation with Dusty Baker, who mentored a lot of African-American ball players over the years, but also with Willie Mays. Kevin Mitchell was converted to the outfield when he joined the Giants. And one of the things I didn't talk about in the presentation, but that's important, is that when this period starts, the commissioner of baseball was Bowie Kuhn, who was frankly just overmatched and not able to really wrestle with the changes in the game. And in one of the stupidest moves I think in baseball history, he had banned Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle for life from the game. And Peter Ueberroth overturned that ban, and very quickly Bob Lurie and the Giants brought Willie Mays back into the Giants family as a kind of a coach, as a goodwill ambassador, as an advisor, all of these things. And one of the tasks that Willie Mays was given was to teach Kevin Mitchell, who's a very athletic ball player, how to play the outfield, because he'd been an infielder his whole career. Now, if you want to learn to play the outfield and Willie Mays is going to be your coach, it's not a bad setup, right? And Kevin Mitchell told me that when he made that one-handed catch, Willie Mays called him up and said, "I didn't teach you that one."
That's cute. A great story.
Bill Schiffner, question?
Lincoln, as I said, all three of your books I've loved, but this one probably the best. Why in '96 were things different where they finally got approval at the end? I knew you talk about it at the end of the book, but what made it where the vote finally went through where they got the stadium?
Well, there was a couple of things, right? One, the city's economy had changed. It was the beginning of what was the kind of the first .com boom, and there was simply a lot more money in San Francisco. Secondly, the Giants by then had a different relationship with the city. And they were not some weird thing happening in the southeast corner of the city like they were for much of the period I was talking about. And then thirdly, I'm just kind of, because I've thought about this a lot too, right? Thirdly, I think the demographics of the city had changed, the politics of the city. So, I'm a political scientist in my day job. So what I would describe is that the kind of left-right fights of the 60s, 70s, and 80s had morphed into a kind of post-materialist consensus where there was more openness to spending money on something like this. And thirdly, like him or not, Willie Brown was about as gifted a politician as any and had more of that coalition building ability and the ability to push something through that he needed than Art Agnos.
And just one other thing. Is there going to be another book on the McGowan years? Because you got to keep the story going.
Not now. I am looking at the book I'm working on. The main book I'm working on now is a biography of George Moscone, which will address baseball peripherally. And I am kind of fishing around for a topic for a new baseball book, but I'm not going to write about the McGowan years. Not that I don't like the McGowan years, but I was able to write about this book in a personal way. This is my journey as a Giants fan. This is the heart of those years. Of course, the last 10, 12 years have been pretty good too, but in a different kind of a way.
And think about us living 3,000 miles away, getting up at all hours of the night to get scores before.
Well, I've lived here since 1990, so I can relate.
So yeah, thank you.
Paul, did you have a question?
No, I did not, Gary. I'm okay. Thanks.
Anybody else before I ask Mars?
Yeah, Gary.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I live on the East Coast as well my whole life, but I've been out to San Francisco many times to see the Giants, been to Candlestick when it was still standing many times. I'm interested to find out. I was never in Candlestick before they, enclosed it for the football, for the 49ers. How bad were the weather conditions when it was still like an open horseshoe before they enclosed it? Obviously didn't put a roof on it, but before they enclosed it, you had that cyclone effect with the upper deck hanging over the lower deck by 20 or 30 rows. Was it just as bad, or was it more windy when it was open like a horseshoe before they enclosed?
I never attended when it was open like a horseshoe because I was too young, but I've read about it. So what I've read, and maybe Bob or someone who did attend could speak to this also, is that kind of whirlwind effect with the wind didn't exist before. And so in some respects, the wind was worse. It was a little bit colder, but the wind was worse after they enclosed it. This is what I've been told. And if you remember, if you went to a ball game out, we're talking about night games now, because whenever you talk about the cold weather at Candlestick, you're talking about night games.
Right.
But you'd be sitting watching the game, particularly if you were in the upper deck where you had a better view, and like in right center field between, Larry Herndon and Jack Clark would be like 10 hot dog wrappers just swirling around in like some dervish-like thing, or like behind home plate. And that was after they enclosed it.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems with the weather, when it was a beautiful sunny day and you figure it's going to be nice in Candlestick, that's when it was the windiest. When it was foggy and people said, well, we don't want to go, it's too foggy, that's when it was pretty pleasant. So that was a tough sell.
Lincoln, I have a tape of the groundbreaking at the new stadium, and also I was there on opening day, and one of these old high 8 tapes. Be happy to share that with you.
I'd love to see it. We were there at opening day for the new ballpark as well. Charles and I and some other friends. So
yeah. If you remember, you could buy seats. That's how we financed the thing. So I bought 2 seats, and it was very, you know, I wound up selling them to a lawyer in San Francisco and made a bundle on that. But because I couldn't fly up there for all the games, but I was right there for during the groundbreaking. That was one of the few times that Mays went on. They had to get the hook to get him off the stage. He was going on and on. You'll see that in the tape.
All right, anybody else before we're going to do 2 more questions, Bill, and then Mars?
Just a observation as a guy who saw the first game at Candlestick and the last, and saw an awful lot in between. One of the things that you'll notice, you may remember about Candlestick, you don't see at other ballparks. I think they knew what was going to be happening, because in most ballparks, when you leave your seat and you go back to the concession stands, it's just an open walk. You just walk back. Not at Candlestick. Remember the big green doors in the lower deck? And when you would leave, that door, sometimes you'd go to open that big door, and I was a small kid, you'd go to open it. And I mean to tell you, that thing would just slam with the wind. But as a result, the concession stands and everything and the restrooms and all that back there, I guess they weren't that relatively cold because the wind never made it there. Right. We had the big green doors. I don't know what they were thinking of there.
Thanks. Mars, wrap it up, and then I'll say goodbye on behalf of the group.
I wanted to mention that one of the sites was 7th and Townsend, when you voted down, which is stone's throw from Teal Stadium. The other was the interesting thing about Candlestick. Well, it's the Alameda Gap. It's between the San Bruno Mountains, where the ocean wind comes right through between the San Bruno Mountains like a funnel and goes right to the bays. So if you got there during a day game for batting practice, which I would go, you know, at 10 o'clock in the morning when they open the gate, come in shorts and a t-shirt. But at 2:30, 3 o'clock, you better bring long pants and a sweatshirt. The other thing I wanted to mention was 1987, the Giants apparently were going to beat the Cardinals. Well, what the Cardinals were ready to lay it down for the Giants, but Jeff Leonard's one flap down and Chili Davis's statement, St. Louis is a cow town, incurred, and that's where they woke up and beat the Giants. Do you remember that?
I was in China, so I read about all this when it didn't, secondhand. But also the Giants stopped hitting. I mean, that's part of the story of that series is the Giants went back to St. Louis and didn't score a run.
Nothing. They lost it Friday night. They lost the game Friday night, and they needed to win all 3 at home, like in '89.
Right. Can't
go back to the visiting city.
Yeah. I mean, I would also say about one last thing about the weather, because it's, is that if you sat in the upper deck seats were the better seats for the weather. If you sat in the lower deck on that nice sunny day, as soon as your section got in the shade, it could drop 10, 15 degrees in one inning. So I always sat upstairs because it was just more pleasant.
Well, let's all give it up for Lincoln Mitchell.
I would like to
presentation, Lincoln.
Thank you.
I'd like to say one thing. Going to Candlestick Park, I think that's where I knew that I was going to be a serious baseball Giants fan.
Yes, ma'am.
Because there's no other way it could happen for me.
Thanks, Charles.
So
what I was saying is, Bob, we can't thank you enough for coming aboard tonight. You're always welcome here, and thanks for giving us people back here something to look for when the team was pretty bad, and you guys helped turn things around. So thank you so much, Bob Laurie.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bob Laurie and Lincoln, thank you very much. It was great.
Great job.
Really appreciate you guys.
Lincoln,
thank you so
wonderful
much.
presentation. One more time, how could they get
the book is in the chat. The book is called The Giants and Their City, Major League Baseball from 1976 to 1992. You can get it at the Kent State Press link, which is in the chat. You can buy it at any online book dealer, your usual place, Powell's, Amazon, wherever you go. please spread the word, rate and review it, tell your friends, anything you can do. We have other media contacts. I'm always happy to speak or give a presentation or whatever I can do. Thank you
One
for having
question,
me.
Lincoln. Have you been on KMBR?
No, I'm trying to get on KMBR. I'm working on that.
Yeah, because that would be good.
It seems like a natural, yeah. So Corey's trying to help me out with that.
Okay.
All right, guys, we will talk next week with Noel Hine. Will be presenting his report on Johnny Antonelli. So until then, I will be here